Administration officials are now telling CNN that the White House lawyer leading the president's team in the Russia investigation is leaving. Ty Cobb is out. And just in, a source indicates that Cobb had been clashing with the president over his combative tweets against Bob Mueller. The source also says that Cobb made it clear on multiple occasions that he could not go down that path. This is all according to our chief White House correspondent, Jim Acosta, who we'll talk to in just a second. According to other reports, Emmett Flood will replace Cobb. Flood's corporate profile outlines his experience in several high-profile legal fights. He represented President Bill Clinton during his impeachment process and former Vice President Dick Cheney when he was sued by former CIA officer Valerie Plame. So to Jim Acosta with the scoop this hour, our chief White House correspondent. Jim, I mean, for everyone saying maybe this was semi-expected, that was a bombshell you just broke.
I think this is big, Brooke, and it indicates there are some big tensions inside the president's legal team, or at least there were as of about a couple of hours ago. Ty Cobb, the president's inside White House lawyer, departing the president's legal team. And Brooke, I'm told, as you were just saying a few moments ago by a source familiar with Ty Cobb's departure, that he had been clashing with the president for weeks over his posture towards the Mueller investigation, that he did not want to be part of a, quote, mudslinging campaign, that he was uncomfortable with the president's tweets, and that he did not want to go down this path of clashing with the special counsel's office. We understand from talking to sources for months now that Ty Cobb had been counseling a much more gentle path of cooperation with the special counsel's office. That may be out the window. Now, Brooke, I can tell you, I did talk to Ty Cobb on the phone just in the last hour. He did try to go out on a positive note, saying, quote, "I've done what I came to do in terms of managing the White House response to the special counsel's requests. I'm extremely grateful to the president and the chief of staff, John Kelly, for the opportunity to serve my country." Now, you were just mentioning a few moments ago Emmett Flood, the Clinton impeachment lawyer, coming in to join the president's inside White House legal team on the special counsel case. We've confirmed that as well. A source familiar with this telling me, though, it's very interesting, Brooke, that Emmett Flood was originally designed to come in to replace the White House counsel Don McGahn. Those discussions have been going on inside the White House for some time now, and that Emmett Flood was going to replace McGahn. Now it seems McGahn will be staying on for some time to provide some stability, perhaps, and that Flood will be replacing instead Ty Cobb. But make no mistake, from what we're hearing from our source familiar with Ty Cobb's departure, he had been clashing and been fighting with the president for weeks over the direction of the president's legal strategy, his PR strategy for going up against Robert Mueller. With Ty Cobb out of the way, it's all bets are off in terms of what's going to happen next, Brooke.
Let me ask you about something else that I touched on here, Jim, that the president clearly feels threatened, publicly to interfere, has been threatening publicly to interfere with the Justice Department. The backstory is that sources tell CNN the Justice Department is refusing a House Republican request to turn over a memo detailing the scope of the Robert Mueller investigation. Why? Because there is an active investigation underway. So the president takes to, of course, what else? Twitter, and says, see the final line here, he'll have no choice but to use his power and get involved with a, quote, rigged system. All of this, as two sources told CNN, that Mueller has raised this possibility of a presidential subpoena in at least one meeting. Jim, what's your reaction to that?
I mean, I think this is why Ty Cobb left the White House, why he's leaving the legal team. He did not agree with these tweets. My understanding, he's not agreed with these tweets almost from the beginning, that he has felt for some time that the president was just pursuing the wrong legal path and trying to fight with the special counsel Robert Mueller in tweets and in headlines and so on. And so I think this is part of the straw that broke the camel's back for Ty Cobb. Obviously, when you read what the president is tweeting there earlier this morning, he's responding to that story in the Washington Post that there was some discussion about the special counsel Robert Mueller issuing a subpoena to compel the president to provide some kind of sworn testimony in the Russia investigation. The president obviously saying in that tweet there that he's willing to shut it down or take some other kind of dramatic action to make sure that he isn't interviewed by the special counsel's office. And from what we understand, and my colleague Gloria Borger and others have been hearing this as well for weeks, is that Ty Cobb has been counseling the president to not go down this path, and it seems he lost that battle and is now trying to make, as best he can, a graceful exit. Brooke.
You mentioned Gloria. We're going to talk to her. Jim Acosta for now.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Our CNN chief political analyst Gloria Borger is standing by, as is Solomon Weisenberg, who served as deputy independent counsel for the Whitewater investigation and questioned President Clinton before a federal grand jury. So let's just get rolling on all these different headlines. Gloria, first to you. The notes that Jim has from the source that, the reasoning behind this Ty Cobb departure was because he was clashing with the president. He didn't want to be part of the mudslinging. He was uncomfortable with the president's tweets. Is this just another signal that the president will not be sitting with Bob Mueller?
Yeah, I think it is. And as we did this story last night, saying that the legal team is at this point preparing a more adversarial posture with the special counsel. It's clear that's the way that is heading. And, to follow up on Jim's reporting, that is not the way that Ty Cobb wanted to go. But he was the odd man out. And I was told by one source that Cobb said, look, when the situation becomes too rancid, that's the word, when it becomes too rancid, then I'm gonna make my exit. There's also the case that, Ty Cobb came in to prepare all the documents, to make sure all the witnesses were interviewed, to make it kind of a smooth procedure with the White House counsel's, with the special counsel's office, which is what he did. That part of his job was over. He wanted to stay if the president was going to have an interview, because
with
he
Bob
wanted
Mueller.
With Bob Mueller, because he wanted to help prepare the president for that interview. So
he left.
it looks like that may not happen. And B, as Jim also is reporting, Cobb had a couple of major blowouts with the president recently over his posture and his tweets about the Department of Justice, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, in the end, it became an untenable situation. And, Ty Cobb said goodbye, and the president probably wasn't unhappy about it.
Solomon, your reaction to the news of Ty Cobb leaving, and do you know that Emmett Flood at all, this Clinton impeachment lawyer?
No, I know of him. I don't know him. When he was working on the Clinton case for Williams and Connolly, he was very junior. I don't think any self-respecting lawyer, particularly any lawyer who used to work for the Department of Justice, could stand for the president's thuggish tweets against his own Department of Justice and against Bob Mueller. And it's disappointing that Rudy Giuliani is apparently standing for it. I don't think there's any question now the president is not going to answer these questions, but it's not just a choice between answering questions and taking the fifth. There's a third way, and I think that's very much related to Emmett Flood coming in now. The third way is to invoke executive privilege. And there's a very interesting constitutional point here. First of all, there's no question that Mueller has the authority to subpoena a sitting president.
Right.
We subpoenaed a sitting president. There's no question about that. But there is a real question about whether Bob Mueller has the right in court to contest executive privilege. He's an inferior officer to the president. And in U.S. versus Nixon, the 8-0 Supreme Court opinion that said that Richard Nixon had to hand over the tapes, Richard Nixon made the argument, Leon Jaworski is an inferior officer to me. This is an intra-branch dispute. Supreme Court, you don't have the right to look at it. And the Supreme Court said, no. The executive regulation, the regulation that appointed Jaworski, gave him the explicit authority to contest executive privilege. There's no such authority for Bob Mueller. So it's going to be a real legitimate question whether or not Mueller can litigate this.
But it's just staying with you along the executive privilege path. When you looked at those 49 questions that were leaked, these Mueller team questions for Trump leaked to the Times, aren't half of the questions that they put out there reportedly on things that happened prior to the presidency? How would that affect it?
Well, first of all, if you're the president-elect and you are about to take the office of the presidency, you can have some privilege for what you're discussing. But it doesn't have to be all the questions. And in fact, in other words, the president doesn't have to object to all the questions. And in fact, he'd be foolish to do so. That's one of the mistakes Nixon made. He just made a blanket claim of executive privilege. The president can say, look, there are 30 of these questions that are just ridiculously broad and they impinge upon my job as the president. My God, you want to know why I decided to delay the resignation letter of Jeff Sessions before I acted? And you want to know about my discussions about that? That goes to the heart of executive power. And so it's not at all clear to me that he would lose. And like I say, first Mueller has to be able to argue that he can even contest it. Mueller, when he opposed Paul Manafort's motion, remember Paul Manafort made a motion that Mueller didn't even have the proper authority to investigate him. And Mueller's response was, hey, this is an intra-branch question between me and the Department of Justice. Someone at the Department of Justice can surely indict you, and it's not your business what happens in an intra-branch dispute. And the president here would be saying, go ahead.
Go ahead, Gloria.
Well, this is where the tweets come in, though. I mean, you can make the case, I'm not a lawyer, you are, but you can make the case that the president has actually publicly spoken about some of these things that he might, in the end, decide he wants to claim privilege on. And, of course,
it's already publicly out there.
It's already publicly out there. And so I think that there is going to be an argument, and that is, of course, people precisely like Ty Cobb and John Dowd, when he worked there, and others, were trying to keep the president from talking about these issues in a public way, which he has done.
I think you're right. There can definitely be a waiver, but again, the argument would be Mueller doesn't even get to come into court and talk about executive privilege and whether it's waived. Whether it's been waived. I'm the president, and I'm telling him he can't do it, and I'm invoking executive privilege. It's more of a procedural argument.
So if the executive privilege, then where does it then go, Solomon? I mean, does it hit a wall? Does it go to the Supreme Court? How does this end? Potentially.
Oh, it's going to go quickly. It's going to go quickly to the Supreme Court,
right?
And they'll have to decide whether or not there's something inherent in Mueller's authority that does allow him to do it.
Now, Solomon mentioned Rudy Giuliani. Gloria, you saw the reporting out of the Washington Post that if Trump does sit with Bob Mueller, that according to Rudy Giuliani, it would be max 2 or 3 hours around a narrow set of questions.
Right. Well, that's what they were trying to do. I mean, this thing has gone on for months and months, right? We all know that. And ironically, the morning of the Michael Cohen raid, the president's lawyers were sitting in an office getting ready a proposal for a narrowly defined presidential testimony on the subject of Russia. And they were getting ready to propose that, according to my reporting, to propose that to Mueller's team. Then they go look at the television set. They see the Michael Cohen raid, and they say, are you kidding me? Well, I guess we're not going to make this proposal. They meet with Mueller's team anyway, but nothing is put on the table. So now you're in a lull right now, and you have, as we in the Washington Post reported last night, Mueller mentioning the S word, the subpoena word.
Subpoena.
And that, again, as we were just talking about, is something that could wind up very quickly heading towards the Supreme Court.
But if you have Rudy Giuliani, Solomon, back over to you. Rudy Giuliani, if he potentially says, all right, we'll do these narrow set of questions for 2 to 3 hours, is it up to the Trump legal team to define that parameter, or is it really the DOJ?
Well, no, it's up to Bob Mueller. You don't let the person who's the subject of your investigation say, here's what you can question and here's what you can't. Mueller's never going to accept that. I want to make a point, though. It's one thing to vigorously litigate this case. There's nothing wrong with the president saying, I'm going to invoke executive privilege to the max. What Ty Cobb was upset about, and what he should have been upset about, were these ugly, unprecedented tweets by the president himself that were full of falsehoods and that were really unprecedented. And I hand it to him for saying he's had enough.
And by the way, that was a lot of the stuff that John Dowd was upset about, because remember, for a while they kept him from criticizing the Department of Justice. Well, and then after Cohen, Katie barred the door. That was it.
We've seen how this
is
not just Cohen.
It's not just Cohen. If you got just a second. Is there time up?
10 seconds.
I'm sorry.
10 seconds. 10 seconds.
Oh, okay.
Go
It's
ahead.
also the timing of when they found out about these questions. Everything changed
Yes,
after they got
yes.
these 45
Well,
questions. 9.
All right, we could keep going. I've got to get to my commercial break, but I appreciate you both so much. We're gonna, I promise you, continue these conversations as more and more news comes out. Solomon and Gloria, thank you both so very much.